To begin, I would like to start with a quote from astronomer Carl Sagan, in which he simply states, "We are all star stuff." Now, this quote, being simple as it is, does pose a much deeper question. What truly are we made of? Well, a scientist would answer, carbon. But where does that carbon come from? And the answer to that question is stars, but more specifically, dying stars. And that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. Now, there are two types of stars in the sky. There are main sequence stars and supergiant stars. Now, main sequence stars live very normal lives in relation to the universe. They are born, as you can see in the top left, blue, hot, and bright. And over the period of their lifetime, shift down to become red, cool, and not so bright. Now, to give some explanation, stars throughout their whole lives are in a constant battle with gravity. Gravity trying to push the star inwards, while the star trying to explode outwards. And towards the end of the star's life, when it's in its red phase, that star starts to run out of fuel to burn and produce that explosive outwards force, and gravity starts to overtake that star. Now, when gravity starts to overtake that star, it starts to become compressed inwards, and that extra compression actually adds to the fuel and causes the star to explode outwards even more. And this cycle will go on for about 1 billion years, which now does sound very long in comparison to our lives, but in a star's life, it's not very long. And according to Faddeev Yu, an astrophysicist, some of these oscillations can last up to 8 days. And what happens is that the star actually pulsates back and forth, almost like a heartbeat. And once the star finally runs out of fuel, it does what is called a planetary nebula, which is where, in its last-ditch effort to spread itself across the universe, it puffs off its outer layers, and just the core remains. Now, the core is only 10% of the star, but it is white hot from all that compression, which is why we call it a white dwarf. And without any fuel to burn, that white dwarf slowly fades away, becomes less bright and less hot, and turns into a black dwarf, which is the final definition of a dead star. Now, the next stars I'd like to talk about are supergiant stars. These stars live very similarly to main sequence stars, but they are born much bigger, much brighter, and much hotter. Now, these stars also have that constant battle with gravity, but when they start to run out of fuel, they don't die nicely and quietly and puff off their outer layers. That final explosion is what we call a supernova. The picture behind me is a very famous supernova called the Crab Nebula, which was first observed in the year 1045 by Chinese astronomers. And it was so bright, the explosion, that it actually lit up the sky during the nighttime for several months on end. And as you can see, it's a very beautiful picture, which is interesting because it's violent yet beautiful at the same time. So, like main sequence stars, supergiant stars also leave their core behind after they die. And this core, which we refer to as a neutron star, is similar to a white dwarf where it is very hot, but because the star is much bigger, gravity condenses the protons and the electrons together into neutrons. The star itself is made of nothing but neutrons, which is why we call it a neutron star. Now, there is one other type of neutron star, which is a black hole, and that is when the star is big enough to actually continuously compress upon itself to a singular point, which is called a singularity. And this is when a black hole is formed. And that immense gravity from a black hole is so powerful that not even light can escape its pull. To give an example, if our sun were shrunk to the diameter of just 3 kilometers, it would become a black hole. So, to sum up, I've discussed main sequence stars and supergiant stars, which live their lives very similarly, but die in very different fashions. Main sequence stars who puff off their outer layers very slowly, very quietly, and slowly fade away into nothing, and supergiant stars, which violently end their lives with supernovas, neutron stars, and black holes. But every time a star dies, a chance for life is born. Thank you.